Ilara Vance gripped the steering wheel of her SUV so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. Her eyes stayed fixed on the winding coastal road ahead, where the last streaks of sun stretched over the dark waters of Holloway Bay. The road led toward a remote fishing village where the first and only clue about her missing students had just surfaced after 8 long, excruciating weeks of fear and unanswered questions. 8 weeks ago, under a pale, milky October sky, Ilara had stepped off an old school bus at the Redwood Creek Nature Preserve. The crisp air smelled of damp soil, decaying leaves, and the faint tang of pine sap. 15 kindergartners from Whispering Pines Elementary, bursting with color in tiny coats and wool hats, spilled out behind her, their chatter echoing through the normally quiet parking lot. "All right, little explorers," Ilara called out with forced cheerfulness, masking the anxious knot that had camped out in her gut for days. "Remember the buddy rule. Miss Sharma and Coach Carter will lead you to Wildflower Glade. I need to check in with Ranger Davies about our conservation project, and I'll meet you there for lunch and story time." Anya Sharma, calm and observant, gave Ilara a reassuring smile. "Don't worry, Ilara, we've got this. Besides, Ben has enough energy for 10 5-year-olds. 15, Coach Ben Carter chimed in with a wink, his booming voice full of playful enthusiasm. "Last one to the old oak is a rotten acorn." The children shrieked with delight and began pairing up, their small hands clasping onto each other. Ilara watched them disappear down the leaf-covered trail, a bright, innocent stream swallowed by the forest. Then she turned back toward the ranger station. What was supposed to be a brief meeting with the stoic Ranger Davies stretched longer than expected, full of logistics, paperwork, and safety concerns. But by the time she returned to Wildflower Glade, everything was gone. The picnic blankets had been laid out, juice boxes untouched, a half-eaten apple, a lone blue glove embroidered with a yellow duck Liam's glove. No children, no teachers, no sounds, only the haunting silence of the ancient trees. She had called out, "Run!" screamed, dialed 911 -1 with trembling hands. They're gone. 15 children, 2 teachers, all gone. The hours that followed were a blur of sirens, rangers, local police from Oakhaven, and Detective Marcus Rourketh man who would lead the case. His voice echoed in her head. "Where were you, Miss Vance? Who was with the children?" Her answers sounded hollow, broken. "I was with the ranger. 45 minutes? Maybe an hour?" There was nothing. No footprints. No calls for help. No signs of a struggle. Only the remnants of a happy morning now twisted into a nightmare. Now, 2 months later, Ilara was back behind the wheel, clinging to a new sliver of hope. The voice of Detective Lucas Brenner came through her Bluetooth speaker, sharp and urgent. "Miss Vance, we need you here as soon as possible. A local fisherman pulled something up, something you need to see. We believe it may be connected to your missing students." What exactly did he find?" Ilara asked, her voice steadier than she felt. There was a pause. A large plastic bag. It contained several children's backpacks. Bright colors, almost untouched by the water. The fisherman says it had rocks weighing it down. Her heart dropped. "Backpacks," she whispered. "From Whispering Pines. That's what we need you to confirm." He pulled it up just off the west coast of Holloway Bay, near Greystone Island. "I'll be there before you are," she said, pressing harder on the gas. Above her visor, a wrinkled photo was clipped, a picture taken the morning of the trip. 15 smiling faces, all in pale blue uniforms. Anya on the left, Ben on the right, both grinning. All gone. Now, Ilara was driving straight back into the heart of the nightmare, not as the teacher leading a cheerful field trip, but as the sole witness to a mystery that had just begun to speak through the sea. 8 weeks. 56 days. Each one a fresh torment for Ilara Vance. The initial frantic search in Redwood Creek Nature Preserve had yielded nothing. Air support, canine units, hundreds of volunteers combing every inch of the sprawling wilderness, all in vain. The 15 children and their 2 chaperones, Anya Sharma and Ben Carter, had vanished as if plucked from the earth by an unseen hand. Ilara's life had become a hollow echo of its former self. Whispering Pines Elementary had placed her on compassionate leave, a euphemism she knew hid a deeper suspicion. The parents of the missing children, their faces etched with a grief that mirrored her own, oscillated between desperate hope and raw, accusatory anger. Some saw her as a fellow victim. Others, in their pain, cast her as a negligent, perhaps even complicit figure. The Oakhaven rumor mill churned relentlessly, fueled by the lack of answers and the human need to find a scapegoat. Ilara, the teacher who wasn't there, was an easy target. She lived in a daze, haunted by the smiling faces in the class photograph that now felt like a relic from another lifetime. Sleep offered no solace, only a recurring nightmare of the empty glade, of Liam's blue mitten lying forlorn on the cold ground. Detective Rourke and his team had interviewed her countless times, dissecting every second of that fateful day, every relationship, every casual remark. She had cooperated fully, handing over her phone, her laptop, her life, for their scrutiny. They found nothing, but the cloud of suspicion lingered, heavy and suffocating. Then, on a bleak Tuesday morning, the 57th day since the vanishing, her phone rang. It was Detective Rourke. His voice, usually measured, held a new, sharp edge. "Ilara, it's Rourke. I need you to come down to Serpent's Coil Bay. Now." A local fisherman, Jedediah Finn, pulled something from the water. "Something we think you need to see." Serpent's Coil Bay. Miles from Redwood Creek, a rugged, windswept stretch of coastline known for its treacherous currents and the skeletal remains of old fishing piers. What could possibly connect it to her missing students? Ilara's heart, a leaden weight in her chest for weeks, began to thrum with a painful mixture of dread and a desperate, fragile hope. "What is it, detective? What did he find?" "I'd rather you see for yourself, Ilara. Just come quickly." The drive was a blur of gray skies and churning sea. Serpent's Coil Bay lived up to its name, the road a series of tight, coiling turns that hugged the cliffside. Ilara gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. When she finally reached the small, ramshackle fishing dock, the air was thick with the smell of salt, fish, and diesel. Police cars were clustered near the water's edge, their flashing lights casting an eerie pulse on the weathered planks. Detective Rourke met her as she stumbled from her car. He looked even more tired than usual, his face etched with a grim resolve. "Thanks for coming, Ilara." He gestured towards a battered fishing trawler, the Sea Serpent, bobbing gently against the pilings. An older man, with a face like tanned leather and eyes the color of the winter sea, stood on deck, talking to a uniformed officer. "That's Jedediah Finn. He found it." Rourke helped her onto the boat. Jed Finn nodded somberly. "Ma'am, I'm real sorry about your troubles. Pulled up my nets about an hour ago, heavy they were. Thought I had a good haul of crab. Found this instead." He pointed to a large, black plastic sack, slick with seawater, lying on the deck. It was crudely tied at the top. "We photographed it in situ," Rourke said, his voice low. "But we need you to look." An officer handed Ilara a pair of latex gloves. Her hands trembled as she pulled them on. With Rourke's assistance, she knelt and carefully loosened the knot on the sack. A nauseating wave of stale, briny air escaped. Inside, nestled amongst damp seaweed, were children's backpacks. Small, brightly colored backpacks. Red, blue, yellow, green, pink. Ilara's breath caught in her throat. "Oh, God," she whispered. "They were weighed down," Jed Finn said, his voice raspy. "With these." He pointed to a pile of jagged rocks on the deck, clearly removed from the sack. "Whoever put 'em in there wanted 'em to sink deep." Tears welled in Ilara's eyes, blurring her vision. She reached a trembling hand towards a small royal blue backpack. It was adorned with faded dinosaur stickers. Leo's backpack. She remembered him proudly showing off his collection. These are their bags," she choked out, her voice thick with unshed tears. "From Whispering Pines, each child had one." Rourke nodded grimly. "We need you to try and identify them, if you can. Any names? Any distinguishing features?" One by one, the officers carefully removed the backpacks from the sack, laying them out on the deck. There were 6 in total. 6 out of 15. Ilara moved from one to the next, her heart constricting with each identification. This is Maya's," she said, pointing to a pink bag with a unicorn keychain still attached, its glitter dulled by the saltwater. "She loved unicorns. And this green one, with the orange trim, that's Noah's." He always had his nature guide tucked inside. She opened it. A small, waterlogged booklet, its pages fused together, was still there. Each bag was a fresh stab of pain, a tangible link to a missing child. She found the small internal labels, meticulously sewn in by parents at the start of the school year. Leo Ramirez, Maya Chen, Noah Williams, Chloe Davis, Samira Iqbal, Ben Carter Jr., Coach Carter's own son, who sometimes joined their kindergarten outings if his own school schedule allowed, and had been on this fateful trip. 6 of them, Rourke said, more to himself than to Alara. What about the others, and the children themselves? Ilara looked out at the vast, indifferent expanse of Serpent's Coil Bay. The gray waves crashed against the shore, carrying secrets in their depths. "The rocks," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "They were meant to stay hidden." "Why? Why just the bags?" "Based on the condition," Rourke observed, examining the fabric of one of the backpacks, "these haven't been in the water for the full 8 weeks. The colors are still relatively vibrant. The material hasn't degraded that much. I'd say a few days, maybe a week at most." Jed Finn grunted in agreement. "Aye, and those rocks weren't heavy enough to keep them down forever in these currents. Whoever did this, they either didn't know the bay, or they didn't care if they were found eventually." A horrifying thought struck Alara. "Does this mean, are they—" She couldn't bring herself to say the word. Rourke put a steadying hand on her arm. If the children were in the bay, we likely would have found something by now. Bodies don't stay hidden for long in open water, especially not for 8 weeks. Marine life, currents. It's a grim reality. He paused, his gaze unwavering. The fact that we've only found weighted bags suggests something else. This wasn't a place of disposal for the children, Alara. This was likely a deliberate act to mislead, to make us think they perished here. This strengthens the theory that they were taken, kidnapped. Kidnapped? The word hung in the salty air, cold and brutal. But by whom? And why? And where were the other 9 backpacks? Where were the 17 missing souls? The teachers, Miss Sharma and Coach Carter. Alara voiced the question that had plagued investigators. Could they have been involved? "It's a possibility we've always considered," Rourke admitted. "Or they were all taken by a third party. Redwood Creek is remote. Minimal security, an opportunity for someone." He looked at Alara, his expression unreadable. "This discovery changes things. It gives us a new direction, but it also raises more questions." He sighed, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. "We'll need to talk again, Alara. Formally. At the station. With this new evidence, everyone who was connected to that day is back under the microscope, including you." The fragile hope that had flickered within Alara died, replaced by a familiar cold dread. The discovery of the backpacks wasn't just a clue. It was a tightening of the net, and she was still caught in its strands. The gray waters of Serpent's Coil Bay had coughed up a piece of the puzzle, but the picture it was forming was darker and more terrifying than she could have ever imagined. The sterile environment of the Oak Haven police station felt colder than the windswept docks of Serpent's Coil Bay. Alara sat opposite Detective Rourke in a small, windowless interview room, the metallic tang of stale coffee and anxiety heavy in the air. The 6 sodden backpacks, now catalogued and sealed in evidence bags, lay on a nearby table, a silent, heartbreaking testament to the day's discovery. "Thank you for your continued cooperation, Miss Vance," Rourke began, his tone studiously neutral. He had a fresh legal pad in front of him, a pen poised. "I understand this is incredibly difficult, but the discovery of these backpacks necessitates a thorough reevaluation of everything we know, or thought we knew." Alara nodded, her throat tight. "I understand. Whatever you need." She had already surrendered her phone records, emails, social media passwords weeks ago. They had found nothing then. What could have changed? The fact that these bags were found weighted down, and likely placed in the bay recently, suggests a deliberate attempt to mislead, Rourke reiterated. "It implies premeditation, an effort to stage a scene. We need to consider who would benefit from such a deception." The unspoken question hung between them. "Could you, Alara Vance, benefit?" "Let's go over that day again," Rourke said, his gaze steady. "The field trip to Redwood Creek Nature Preserve. You arrived at approximately 9 a.m.? "Yes, around then." Alara closed her eyes briefly, summoning the memories that were now etched into her soul with acid. The children were excited. Anya Sharma and Ben Carter took them down the trail towards Wildflower Glade. I went to the ranger station to speak with Ranger Davies. About the conservation project, Rourke prompted. Yes, planting saplings. We discussed logistics, safety protocols. It took longer than I expected. Guilt, sharp and familiar, twisted in her gut. And how long were you separated from the main group? Perhaps 45 minutes, closer to an hour by the time I walked to the glade. During that time, you had no contact with Miss Sharma or Mr. Carter? Number. Cell service is patchy in the preserve. We didn't expect to need to call, and when you arrived at Wildflower Glade, they were all gone. All of them. The picnic was set out. Liam's mitten was on the ground, but no one was there. Her voice trembled despite her efforts to keep it steady. Rourke made a note. Let's talk about the adults who were with the children. Anya Sharma, Ben Carter. What can you tell me about them? Any problems? Financial difficulties? Unusual behavior leading up to the trip? Alara searched her memory. Anya was her closest friend at Whispering Pines, a dedicated teacher, kind and principled. Ben was newer to the school, energetic, always cheerful, adored by the children. No, she said firmly. Anya she was stable, happy. She loved her job. Ben was the same. I can't imagine either of them harming the children or running away. People can have hidden lives, Miss Vance, Rourke said, his voice devoid of inflection. Pressures we know nothing about. He paused. The backpacks, 6 of them, found in Serpent's Coil Bay, miles from Redwood Creek. It suggests access to a vehicle, knowledge of the coastline, a plan. Ilara felt a chill. He was building a narrative, brick by painstaking brick. What are you implying, Detective? I'm not implying anything. I'm exploring possibilities. The children disappeared from Redwood Creek. The area is bordered by several large private properties. One of those is Blackwood Farm, owned by a Mr. Silas Blackwood. His property manager is a Malachi Thorne. Did you or the school have any dealings with them? Blackwood Farm? Ilara frowned. No, not directly. I know it's there, a sprawling place. Ranger Davies mentioned that the preserve sometimes coordinates with adjacent landowners on fire prevention, things like that. But we had no planned interaction with them. Mr. Blackwood and Mr. Thorne were interviewed in the initial sweep. Rourke continued. They reported seeing nothing unusual that day. Mr. Thorne, in particular, manages the day-to-day operations and has extensive knowledge of the land, including access points to the preserve that aren't public. Ilara felt a flicker of unease at the mention of Malachi Thorne. She'd only seen him once, from a distance, during a previous school planning visit to the preserve months ago. A tall, gaunt figure, he'd been watching them from the edge of Blackwood's property line, his presence unsettling even then. Detective, Ilara began, her voice low but firm. I know how this looks. I was the only one not there, but I had nothing to do with their disappearance. I love those children. Anya and Ben are my friends, my colleagues. I've been living a nightmare for 8 weeks. Rourke's expression softened almost imperceptibly. I understand this is distressing, Miss Vance, and I appreciate your candor. However, the fact remains, you were not with the group. You have no alibi for the precise time they vanished, other than your conversation with Ranger Davies, which we have corroborated, but that still leaves a window. He leaned forward slightly. The backpacks being found now, like this, it could be an attempt to frame someone, or to divert attention as the real perpetrators move the children, if they are indeed still alive. The words, if they are indeed still alive, struck Ilara like a physical blow. We need to be thorough, Rourke said, his professional mask firmly back in place. We'll need to go through your financials again, your communications since our last review. Standard procedure in light of new evidence. Ilara wanted to scream, to protest her innocence, but she knew it would be futile. It would only make her look more guilty. Fine, she said, her voice flat with exhaustion and resignation. Take whatever you need. I have nothing to hide. An officer escorted her to a small room where she logged into her email accounts, her online banking, her meager social media profiles, while another officer watched. The humiliation was a fresh layer of pain on an already raw wound. After what felt like an eternity, Rourke returned. Your accounts appear consistent with your previous statements, he said, his tone unchanged. There are no red flags. A small, almost imperceptible sigh of relief escaped Ilara. You're free to go, Miss Vance, for now. But I must ask you to remain in Oakhaven and be available for further questions. This investigation is far from over." As Alara walked out of the police station and into the fading afternoon light, the weight of suspicion felt heavier than ever. She was a witness, a victim, and a suspect, all rolled into one. The discovery at Serpent's Coil Bay had churned the waters, bringing new, disturbing elements to the surface, but offering no real clarity. Driving home, her mind raced. Blackwood Farm, Malachi Thorne, the weighted backpacks. Someone was playing a sick game, manipulating the investigation. The police were following their procedures, but Alara felt a desperate, urgent need to do something more. They were looking at her, while the real answers might lie elsewhere. A reckless thought began to form, a spark of defiance in the suffocating darkness. The police would conduct their official inquiries, but they hadn't lived with those children day in and day out. They didn't know their little quirks, their fears, their favorite hiding spots. They hadn't felt the oppressive watchfulness of Malachi Thorne from the edge of the woods. Before she reached her empty apartment, Alara made a decision. She couldn't just sit and wait, a pawn in someone else's investigation. Tomorrow, she would go back, not to Serpent's Coil Bay, but to the place where it all began, Redwood Creek, and perhaps to the borders of Blackwood Farm. If there were answers to be found, she would find them herself. The police saw her as a suspect. It was time she started acting like an investigator. The following morning, Alara woke before dawn, a grim determination hardening her features. The image of the 6 sodden backpacks and the unspoken accusation in Detective Rourke's eyes had fueled a restless night. She dressed in practical, dark clothing, jeans, sturdy hiking boots, a warm jacket, and packed a small backpack with water, a first aid kit, a powerful flashlight, and her phone fully charged. She left a note for her worried sister, vague enough not to cause immediate alarm, but clear enough if she didn't return by nightfall. Instead of heading towards the main entrance of Redwood Creek Nature Preserve, which would undoubtedly still have a police presence, Alara drove along the winding country roads that skirted its perimeter. Her destination, the ill-defined boundary where the preserve met the sprawling, private lands of Blackwood Farm. She remembered from maps studied during the initial search that an old, disused service road branched off near this area. She parked her car, carefully concealed behind a thicket of overgrown rhododendrons, and set off on foot. The air was cold and damp, the silence of the woods broken only by the cawing of crows and the crunch of her boots on the frosted ground. After 20 minutes of navigating through dense undergrowth, guided by a compass and a faded memory of the map, she found it. A barely discernible track, more animal trail than road, that seemed to lead deeper into the Blackwood property, paralleling the preserve. This was uncharted territory, both literally and figuratively. Trespassing. But the thought of the missing children, of Anya and Ben, spurred her on. The farm itself soon came into view through the trees, a collection of weathered outbuildings, a large, dark barn, and a sprawling, 2-story farmhouse that looked as though it had grown organically from the land itself, its paint peeling, its windows like dark, watchful eyes. There was no sign of life, save for a plume of smoke curling lazily from one of the farmhouse chimneys. Alara decided against approaching the main house directly. Her unease about Malachi Thorne was too strong. Instead, she skirted the edge of the cleared land, keeping to the tree line, her gaze fixed on the large, ominous-looking barn. It seemed the most likely place for anything illicit to be hidden. As she drew closer, moving with a caution born of fear and adrenaline, she noticed a young woman, probably in her early 20s, mucking out a stable near the barn. She wore overalls, and her hair was tied up in a messy bun. This was an opportunity. Taking a deep breath, Alara stepped out from the trees. "Excuse me?" The young woman startled, dropping her pitchfork. "Oh, you scared me. Didn't hear you approach." She had a kind, open face, though her eyes were wary. "I'm so sorry," Alara said, trying to sound casual, friendly. "I'm Alara Vance. I'm a teacher. My class went missing in the preserve a couple of months ago." Recognition, and then sympathy, flickered in the woman's eyes. "Oh, Lord, yes, I heard about that. Terrible thing. Just terrible. I'm Lily, by the way, Lily Cartwright. I only started working here a few weeks ago, after, after it happened. "Lily," Ilara said, seizing the opening, "I know this is a strange request, but the police are still investigating, and I just needed to see the area again." "The preserve borders this farm, doesn't it?" Lily nodded. "Runs right along the back acres. Mr. Blackwood lets the rangers access through here sometimes for fire patrols." "Would you mind if I just looked around the edge of the property a little?" Ilara asked, injecting a note of pleading into her voice. "Near the barn, perhaps? I'm just trying to understand the landscape, see if there's any place they might have wandered." Lily hesitated. "Well, Mr. Thorne, he's the manager. He doesn't much like strangers snooping. And Mr. Blackwood is particular, but—" she lowered her voice. "Mr. Thorne's gone into Oakhaven for supplies, and Mr. Blackwood's in the house with his accounts. If you're quick and stick near the barn, I suppose it wouldn't hurt." Relief washed over Ilara. "Thank you, Lily. You have no idea how much this means." Lily gave a small, nervous smile and returned to her work, though she kept casting furtive glances towards Ilara. Ilara made her way towards the barn. It was an old, imposing structure, its wooden planks weathered to a silver gray, its vast roof patched in places. The main doors were secured with a heavy padlock and chain. She circled it, her eyes scanning the ground, the walls, looking for anything out of place. As she rounded the far side, the side facing away from the farmhouse and towards the denser woods, something glinted in the weak sunlight, caught in the rough grass near the barn's foundation, close to a small, grime-encrusted window. Ilara knelt. It was a feather, but not just any feather. It was long, iridescent, a stunning cascade of emerald green, sapphire blue, and shimmering gold. It was utterly unlike anything from the local bird life. It looked exotic, tropical. Her heart began to pound. Where could such a feather have come from? She carefully picked it up, its barbs soft against her gloved fingers, and tucked it into an evidence bag she'd brought from her backpack. As she stood, her gaze fell upon a narrow, overgrown path that led away from the back of the barn, disappearing into the thickest part of the woods in the direction of the most remote section of the preserve. Unlike the other farm tracks, this one looked deliberately untended, almost hidden. "Lily?" Ilara called softly, walking back towards the stables. "That path, behind the barn, where does it lead?" Lily frowned, wiping her brow with the back of her hand. "That one? Oh, mister. Thorne says it's an old logging track, goes nowhere special. Said it's unsafe, full of sinkholes. Strictly off limits. He keeps that part of the property pretty locked down." Off limits. The word sent a shiver down Ilara's spine. An exotic feather near a locked barn, and a forbidden path. Coincidence? Before she could ponder further, the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway leading to the farmhouse announced an arrival. Lily's eyes widened in alarm. "That'll be Mr. Thorne," she whispered urgently. "He's back early. You should go quickly." Ilara didn't need telling twice. She thanked Lily again, a silent promise to protect the girl's confidence, and melted back into the tree line, her heart hammering. She took one last look at the barn, the strange feather heavy in her pocket, the image of the overgrown path imprinted on her mind. As she made her way back towards her car, a new, chilling thought emerged. The backpacks in Serpent's Coil Bay, miles away. This farm, with its locked barn, exotic feather, and secret paths, what if Redwood Creek wasn't just a place where children got lost? What if it, and the properties bordering it, were part of something far more sinister? She had come seeking answers, and instead, she had found only more questions, each one darker and more disturbing than the last. But now, she also had something tangible, the feather, and a growing conviction that Blackwood Farm, and perhaps its watchful manager Malachi Thorne, held a key to the vanishing at Whispering Pines. The encounter at Blackwood Farm had left Ilara deeply unsettled. The iridescent feather felt like a tangible piece of a puzzle she couldn't yet comprehend. She spent the rest of the day researching exotic birds online, her search eventually leading her to the quetzal, a magnificent bird native to the cloud forests of Central America. Its plumage matched the feather perfectly. What on earth would a quetzal feather be doing at a remote farm in Oakhaven? She knew she should go to Detective Rourke with her findings. But what did she really have? A feather? An overgrown path? And a bad feeling about Malachi Thorne. It was circumstantial at best. Rourke, already suspicious of her, might dismiss it, or worse, see it as another attempt by her to deflect attention. No, she needed something more concrete. The next day, steeling her nerves, Ilara drove back towards Blackwood Farm. This time, however, she wouldn't skulk around the edges. She would confront them, under the guise of a concerned teacher following up on any possible lead, however faint. She parked openly in the gravel driveway and walked to the farmhouse's front porch. Before she could knock, the door creaked open, and Silas Blackwood himself stood there. He was older than she expected, his face a roadmap of wrinkles, his eyes pale and distant. "Miss Vance?" he said, his voice raspy. "I recognize you from the news. What can I do for you?" "Mr. Blackwood," Ilara began, "I apologize for intruding. I'm desperate for any information about my missing students. The police have been here, I know, but sometimes a fresh pair of eyes—" "A tragic business," Blackwood said, shaking his head slowly. "We saw nothing, heard nothing. Malachi, my manager, he keeps a close watch on the property. He would have noticed anything amiss." As if summoned, Malachi Thorne appeared in the hallway behind Blackwood. He was tall and gaunt, dressed in dark, practical clothing. His eyes, cold and reptilian, fixed on Ilara, and a shiver traced its way down her spine. "Miss Vance," Thorne said, his voice a low growl, "Mr. Blackwood has already told the police everything we know, which is nothing." "I understand," Ilara said, trying to keep her voice even. "But I was near your barn yesterday," a calculated half-truth, "and I found this." She pulled out the quetzal feather, holding it up. "It's rather unusual. I wondered if you kept any exotic birds, or if perhaps you'd seen any." Blackwood peered at it. "Can't say I have. Strange-looking thing." Thorne's eyes, however, narrowed almost imperceptibly. A flicker of something, surprise, annoyance, crossed his face before his expression became shuttered once more. "Just a stray feather, Miss Vance. We get all sorts of migratory birds passing through. The woods are full of them." He waved a dismissive hand. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we have work to do." The dismissal was clear, but Ilara pressed on. "Of course, I won't keep you. Perhaps I could just use your restroom before I head back to town. It's a bit of a drive." Blackwood hesitated, but Thorne cut in, his voice smoother now, almost silken. "Certainly. Down the hall, second door on the left. Next to my office." He gestured. As Ilara walked down the dim hallway, her heart pounded. Thorne's office. She passed it. The first door on the left. It was slightly ajar. A faint smell of smoke, acrid and chemical, drifted from within. Peeking through the crack, she saw Thorne standing by a small cast-iron stove, feeding papers into its fiery maw. Burning evidence? Her mind raced. The restroom was her alibi. She quickly used it. Then, on her way back, she stumbled against Thorne's office door, pushing it open a little further as if by accident. "Oh, I'm so sorry, Mr. Thorne," she exclaimed, feigning embarrassment. Thorne spun around, his face a mask of irritation. "Watch where you're going, Miss Vance." The stove was now closed, but the smell of smoke was stronger. On his cluttered desk, Ilara's eyes snagged on something, a small, distinctive digital watch with a bright blue backlight, its strap slightly frayed. It was identical to the one Coach Ben Carter had proudly shown off just weeks before the field trip, a gift he'd saved up for. Her breath hitched. "That's an interesting watch," she said, trying to sound casual, her gaze flicking from the watch to Thorne's impassive face. Thorne glanced down at his wrist. "This old thing, picked it up cheap at a market." He straightened some papers on his desk, his movements stiff. One of the papers he moved was a crumpled receipt. Ilara caught a glimpse of a logo, a shipping company, and the words Corvus Port and Livestock Crates. Her mind reeled. Ben Carter's watch, a quetzal feather, burning papers, a shipping receipt for livestock crates to Corvus Port, the same direction as Serpent's Coil Bay, where the backpacks were found. "Well, thank you for your time," Ilara said, her voice trembling slightly, "and for the use of your facilities." She backed out of the office, her gaze unintentionally dropping to Thorne's feet. He was wearing sturdy work boots, caked with mud. But beneath the mud, she saw a flash of familiar blue and white stripes on the side of one boot, the exact design of the running shoes Ben Carter always wore, boasting of their comfort. Nausea rose in her throat. This couldn't be a coincidence. Thorne had Ben's watch, and possibly his shoes. He was burning documents. He was connected to shipments to a coastal port. As she reached the front door, Blackwood was there, his expression unreadable. "Find what you were looking for, Miss Vance?" he asked, his voice strangely flat. "No, Mr. Blackwood," Elara said, her hand on the doorknob. "I don't think I did." She almost ran to her car, her hands shaking so much she could barely fit the key in the ignition. As she pulled away from Blackwood Farm, she saw Malachi Thorne standing on the porch, watching her, his figure a dark silhouette against the gray farmhouse. His eyes, even from that distance, seemed to burn into her. She hadn't found her students, but she had found something infinitely more terrifying, a dawning certainty that Malachi Thorne was not just a farm manager, but a predator wearing familiar stolen items, a man who held the darkest of secrets. And Corvus Port, she needed to tell Rourke. Now. Elara's fingers fumbled with her phone as she sped away from Blackwood Farm, her gaze darting to the rearview mirror. Malachi Thorne's silhouette remained on the porch, a fixed point of menace. She had to call Detective Rourke. The watch, the shoes, the Quetzal feather, the burnt papers, the shipping receipt mentioning livestock crates in Corvusport, it was a cascade of damning connections. "Rourke, it's Elara Vance," she said, her voice tight with urgency when he finally answered. "I'm at Blackwood Farm, or I just left. You need to get here." Malachi Thorne. "He has Ben Carter's watch, I'm sure of it. And his shoes, too. I saw a receipt for livestock crates being shipped to Corvus Port, and he was burning documents." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "Elara, what were you doing at Blackwood Farm alone? I told you to stay away from there." Rourke's voice was a mixture of anger and alarm. "That receipt you mentioned, Corvus Port. We've just had a hit on a shell corporation linked to illicit animal trafficking operating out of there. This is bigger and more dangerous than we thought. Get out of that area, now. Send me your live location. We're dispatching a tactical team, but it'll take time." "I'm already on the main road, heading back towards Oakhaven," Elara said, glancing nervously in her mirror again. No one seemed to be following. "He knows I saw things, Rourke. He knows I'm suspicious. Just drive, Elara. Don't stop for anything. We'll meet you en route." But as she rounded a sharp bend, a dark pickup truck, its engine rumbling like a caged beast, pulled out from a hidden dirt track, blocking the road. Malachi Thorne was behind the wheel, his face a grim mask. Elara slammed on her brakes, her car skidding to a halt inches from the truck's bumper. Her heart leaped into her throat. Trapped. Thorne got out of his truck, moving with a predatory grace. He walked towards her car. Elara fumbled with the door locks, but it was too late. He wrenched her door open. "Going somewhere, Miss Vance?" he snarled, his eyes like chips of ice. "Leaving so soon? I thought we might have a little chat about feathers and watches and things that don't concern meddling schoolteachers." Before Elara could scream, he reached in, his grip like iron on her arm, and hauled her out of the car. She struggled, kicked, but he was immensely strong. He dragged her towards his truck, opened the passenger door, and shoved her inside. "You shouldn't have come back," he said, his voice a low growl as he slammed the door and walked around to the driver's side. He took her phone, tossing it onto the dashboard. Curiosity killed the cat, as they say. He started the truck and, instead of turning back towards the farm, he continued down the main road for a short distance, then veered sharply onto another, even more concealed dirt track that plunged into the dense woods, a track Elara hadn't noticed before. This one led deeper into the Blackwood property, towards the ominous barn. They pulled up beside it. Silas Blackwood was waiting, his face pale and etched with a mixture of fear and resignation. "Malachi, what is this?" Blackwood stammered, his gaze flicking nervously towards Elara. "The police. They might be on their way." "She knows too much, Silas," Thorne said coldly, dragging Elara from the truck. "She was snooping in my office, saw the receipts, recognized Carter's things. We can't risk it." He shoved Elara towards the barn. "The shipment is due tonight. She'll be an unscheduled addition." Blackwood wrung his hands. "This wasn't the agreement, Malachi. Animals, yes, but not people." "Plans change, old man," Thorne sneered. "Now help me with her, unless you want to explain all this to the authorities yourself." Fear seemed to galvanize Blackwood. Reluctantly, he moved to help Thorne. Elara fought with all her might, but between the two men she was easily overpowered. Thorne produced a roll of duct tape and roughly sealed her mouth, then bound her wrists and ankles with thick zip ties. He unlocked the heavy padlock on the barn doors, revealing a dim, cavernous interior. The air inside was thick with the smell of hay, manure, and something else. A musky, unfamiliar scent. Thorn pushed her forward. As her eyes adjusted to the gloom, Ilara saw them. Crates. Dozens of wooden and metal crates of various sizes, stacked haphazardly. From some, she heard faint rustlings, hisses, and low growls. This wasn't just a barn, it was a holding pen. In the center of the barn, a large, empty animal cage stood waiting, its metal bars glinting ominously. "Welcome to the menagerie, Miss Vance," Thorn said, a cruel smile twisting his lips. He and a reluctant Blackwood lifted her and unceremoniously dumped her into the cage, the metal cold against her skin. Thorn latched the door, a heavy, definitive click. As Thorn rummaged through a collection of tools and ropes nearby, Ilara's gaze swept the barn floor. Her blood ran cold. Partially hidden beneath a pile of straw, near one of the crates, was a small, discarded child's sneaker, bright pink with a silver star on the side. Maya's sneaker. She remembered Maya proudly showing it off on the morning of the field trip. Tears streamed down Ilara's face, hot against the cold tape. They hadn't just vanished, they had been brought here. This farm, this barn, it was the heart of the nightmare. Thorn turned back, holding a length of rope. The albatross won't be pleased about an extra mouth to feed, or an extra problem to dispose of, he muttered, more to himself than to Blackwood. But he'll understand the necessity. The albatross? Blackwood whispered, his voice trembling. You said this was small time, Malachi, just a bit of extra income. Things escalate, Silas, Thorn said, his attention now on Ilara. He approached the cage. Don't worry, Miss Vance. You won't be lonely for long. The transport will be here soon. And then, you'll all be going on a much longer field trip. He let out a dry, mirthless laugh. Ilara stared back, her eyes wide with terror and a dawning, horrifying understanding. The children, Anya, Ben, they had been victims of something far larger, far more organized than a simple kidnapping. And now, she was trapped in the same web, deep inside the belly of the beast. The hours Ilara spent locked in the cage within Malachi Thorn's barn were a descent into pure terror. The duct tape over her mouth was suffocating, her bound wrists and ankles aching. But worse than the physical discomfort was the chilling symphony of sounds emanating from the surrounding crates. Soft hisses, guttural growls, the frantic scratching of claws, and occasionally a low, mournful bird call that sounded eerily like the quetzal feather she'd found. The musky, unfamiliar animal scent was overpowering, mixed with the cloying sweetness of fear. Silas Blackwood paced nervously outside her cage for a while, muttering to himself, his face a mask of regret and fear. Never wanted this. Just the animals. Thorn. He got in too deep with the albatross. He avoided Ilara's pleading gaze, eventually retreating into the farmhouse, leaving her alone with the unseen creatures and her mounting dread. As dusk settled, casting long, eerie shadows through the barn's grimy windows, the distant rumble of a heavy vehicle approached. Thorn reappeared, his expression grimly satisfied. "Showtime," he muttered, unlocking Ilara's cage. He didn't untie her, but, with surprising strength, hauled her out and slung her over his shoulder like a sack of grain. Outside, a large, unmarked transport truck was backing up to the barn doors. Its engine idled with a deep, throbbing growl. Two men, burly and stone-faced, emerged from the cab. They spoke in low tones to Thorn, their words too indistinct for Ilara to catch over the engine noise and the pounding of her own heart. One by one, the crates were loaded onto the truck, using a hydraulic lift. Ilara, still bound and gagged, was handled last, dumped unceremoniously into a dark, cramped space at the very back of the truck, surrounded by the shifting, uneasy presence of the crated animals. The heavy metal doors slammed shut, plunging her into near-total darkness, save for thin slivers of light filtering through ventilation slats. The engine roared, and the truck lurched forward, carrying her away from Blackwood Farm and any hope of immediate rescue. The journey was torturous. The truck's suspension was poor, and every bump in the rough track sent jarring pains through her already aching body. The air grew hot and stagnant, thick with the smell of distressed animals and diesel fumes. She heard their panicked movements, their soft cries of fear, a chorus of captive misery. Ilara lost track of time. Hours crawled by. Her thoughts jumbled, a chaotic mix of fear for herself, for the missing children, for Anya and Ben. Where were they taking her? What had happened to the others? Maya's sneaker in the barn was a terrifying confirmation that at least some of the children had been there. Eventually, the jolting ride smoothed out slightly, suggesting they had reached a paved road. But then, after what felt like another eternity, the surface beneath them became rough again, the truck bouncing and swaying violently. Through the ventilation slats, Ilara caught glimpses of a desolate, moonlit landscape, flat, arid terrain, scrub brush, the occasional skeletal silhouette of a Joshua tree. They were in a desert. The truck finally slowed and came to a halt. The engine cut off, and the sudden silence was almost as unnerving as the previous noise. Moments later, the rear doors creaked open, flooding the cargo bay with the harsh glare of utility lights. "Get the woman out first," a gruff voice ordered. Then the reptiles. They're most sensitive to the temperature drop. Rough hands grabbed Ilara, dragging her from the truck. She blinked against the light, her eyes struggling to adjust. They were in what appeared to be a large, dilapidated warehouse, its corrugated metal walls streaked with rust. Cages and crates, similar to those from the barn, lined the walls, many already occupied. The air stank of animal waste, fear, and decay. Her captors, 3 men she didn't recognize, their faces hard and impassive, half carried, half dragged her to an empty cage against a far wall and thrust her inside, securing the latch with a heavy bolt. They then returned to the truck to unload the animal crates. Ilara lay there, dazed and trembling, her gaze sweeping the grim surroundings. This was a nexus, a holding facility for a vast, illegal operation. The men moved about their tasks, occasionally speaking in low, guttural voices, sometimes lapsing into Spanish. Ilara strained to listen, desperate for any scrap of information. "Thorne's getting sloppy," one man grumbled, wiping sweat from his brow. "Sending us a human? The albatross won't like this. Complicates everything." "Said she saw too much," another replied. He was older, with a scarred face and cold, dead eyes. Ilara recognized him as the one who had given the orders at the truck. "Told us to make sure she stays quiet, permanently if necessary." A younger man, visibly nervous, muttered, "What is it with those farm people? First those school kids last month, messing up that prime shipment, and now this woman. It's getting too risky." "School kids last month?" Ilara's heart leaped. They were talking about her students. "Those kids were a nightmare," the first man agreed, shaking his head. "Finding a buyer willing to take on that kind of heat was tough enough. And then we had to deal with those 2 teachers. Burying them out in that godforsaken stretch of desert wasn't what I signed up for." Ilara's world tilted. Burying them. Anya and Ben. A strangled sob escaped her, muffled by the tape. They were dead. Murdered. The horror was absolute. "At least the kids are profitable once they're processed," the scarred man said pragmatically. "Quintana, the albatross. He'll make his investment back tenfold once we get them out of the country. If we can get them out, police patrols have been heavier along the shipping routes since that mess with the primates." "That's why the last shipment had to turn back to Corvus Port, right?" the younger one asked. "They're still holed up at that abandoned Seagate cannery?" The scarred man nodded. "Yeah, 15 of them. Well, 13 now. One of the little ones didn't make the initial transport from the woods. Bit of an accident with the van. Another one, the girl with the breathing trouble, she conked out on us at the first holding spot. Too much stress, not enough of her medicine. Quintana decided to keep the rest hidden at the cannery until the roots clear up. 13 children, alive, at an abandoned cannery near Corvus Port. 2 were lost. Leo, hit by a van in the woods. Maya, her asthma. Oh dear God, Maya. The names, the details seared into Ilara's brain. The scarred man approached Ilara's cage, his eyes cold and assessing. "We need to sedate her. She's heard too much." He turned to one of his companions. "Fetch the kit. The usual dose for a primate should do." One of the men returned with a syringe filled with a clear liquid. "Hold her still." They unlocked the cage. Despite her bonds, Ilara thrashed wildly, kicking out. Her foot connected with one man's chin, sending him stumbling back with a curse. The syringe clattered to the concrete floor, shattering, its contents spilling uselessly. "Malcriada," the man she'd kicked, snarled, rubbing his jaw. "Idiots!" the scarred man snapped. "That sedative is expensive. We don't have time for this. The Albatross is expecting an update, and we still need to prep the avian shipment." He glared at Alara. "Get another dose. And be more careful this time." A second syringe was prepared. This time, 3 men pinned Alara down, while the fourth approached with the needle. She felt a sharp prick in her arm, a burning sensation as the drug entered her bloodstream. "That should keep her quiet for a while," the man said, withdrawing the needle. But in their haste and her struggles, Alara knew the injection hadn't been clean. Some of the liquid had definitely spilled as the needle was almost ripped free. He hadn't fully depressed the plunger, a partial dose. They relocked her cage and moved away, their voices fading as a wave of dizziness washed over Alara. Her vision blurred. The men's words echoed strangely. 13 children. Seagate Cannery. Corvusport. Anya and Ben. Buried in the desert. She fought to stay conscious, to hold on to these precious, terrible details. Suddenly, a new sound cut through the warehouse, distant but growing rapidly louder, the unmistakable wail of police sirens. The men froze. "La policía." "Como?" one exclaimed. "Someone must have talked," the scarred man said grimly. "Thorn or Blackwood, the cowards. We need to go. Now." "What about the animals? The woman?" "No time. Save yourselves. The Albatross will understand." They scrambled for the exit, piling back into their transport truck. The engine roared to life, and Alara heard the vehicle speeding away just as the first police cruisers, lights flashing, screeched to a halt outside the warehouse. Through a drugged haze, Alara saw the warehouse doors burst open. Uniformed officers flooded in, weapons drawn. One officer, tall and familiar even in her blurred vision, rushed towards her cage. Detective Rourke. "We've got her," he yelled. "She's alive!" As gentle hands worked to free her from the cage, Alara fought against the encroaching blackness, clinging to one vital thought. The children. Corpus Christi. Seagate Cannery. 13. The cool desert air was a shock against Alara's skin as officers carefully carried her from the stifling heat and stench of the warehouse. Her limbs were heavy, her thoughts struggling to coalesce through the fog of the partial sedative dose. Detective Rourke was beside her, his face a mixture of relief and grim concern. "Alara, can you hear me?" His voice seemed to come from a great distance. "The children," she mumbled, her lips numb, her tongue thick. "Corvusport, Seagate Cannery. 13. "Easy, Alara. Paramedics are on their way," Rourke said, his hand steady on her arm. "You're safe now." They settled her into the back seat of a police cruiser, the window rolled down to offer fresh air. Through her swimming vision, Alara saw the chaotic ballet of law enforcement securing the perimeter. Officers in hazmat gear beginning to assess the crated animals, their concern palpable even for the non-human captives of this grim enterprise. Within minutes, an ambulance arrived, its siren cutting through the night. 2 paramedics rushed to her side. "What happened to her?" "One, a woman with kind eyes," asked Rourke. "Smugglers injected her with some kind of sedative," Rourke explained. "We think it was meant for large animals." She fought back. It might have been a partial dose. The male paramedic was already checking Alara's vital signs. Pulses thready, slow, pupils dilated, respiratory rate decreased, consistent with a wildlife tranquilizer. "We'll administer naloxone," the female paramedic decided, preparing an injection. "It's an opioid antagonist. Should counteract most sedatives if they're opioid-based, which many animal tranquilizers are." Alara felt the sharp prick of another needle, followed by a spreading warmth. Slowly, miraculously, the oppressive fog in her mind began to lift. Her vision sharpened, sounds became distinct, her thoughts less like struggling swimmers in a murky pool. "That's better," the paramedic observed, noting Alara's increased alertness. "How are you feeling?" "More. Here," Alara managed, her voice stronger. "Still dizzy. Thank you." Detective Rourke leaned in, his face etched with urgency. "Alara, what did you overhear? About the children?" With growing clarity, fueled by the naloxone and a desperate surge of adrenaline, Alara recounted everything. The 13 surviving children, the abandoned Seagate Cannery near Corvusport, their makeshift prison, the 2 children who had perished, Leo Ramirez, hit by a vehicle in the initial chaos, Maya Chen, succumbing to an asthma attack without her medication, and the unbearable news about Anya Sharma and Ben Carter murdered and buried in the desert. Each word was a fresh stab of pain, but she forced them out, painting a horrific picture for the stoic detective. Rourke's expression hardened with each revelation, his jaw tightening. "We'll find them, Alara," he vowed, his voice raw. "The children, and Anya and Ben's remains. We'll bring them all home." He turned as another officer approached. "Sir, the transport truck that fled the warehouse has been apprehended 10 miles south. 4 suspects in custody." "Good," Rourke replied, then turned back to Alara. "When we arrived at Blackwood Farm, Thorne and Blackwood were attempting to flee. Blackwood surrendered immediately. He was terrified. He confessed to his involvement in the animal smuggling and told us Thorne had taken you, that they were working for a syndicate run by someone known only as the Albatross. He gave us the location of this warehouse. Thorne resisted arrest and has been taken into custody." Alara nodded, processing the information. "Blackwood, he said he only agreed to animals, not people." Rourke's face was grim. "It appears this warehouse was a major transit hub for an international exotic animal smuggling ring. They'd store animals here, switch vehicles, then move them to coastal shipping points. The children were an unexpected complication, one the Albatross apparently decided to profit from." Another officer approached, holding a small, grimy object in a gloved hand. It was a bright pink hair clip, shaped like a butterfly. "Sir, we found this inside the warehouse, near where Miss Vance was caged." Rourke took it, then showed it to Alara. Even with her mind still clearing, she recognized it instantly. Zoe Fernandez. She wore that every single day. It was her favorite. Tears welled in her eyes. A tiny, innocent piece of a child's life found in this place of horrors. Rourke's voice cut through the air, sharp and commanding, as he barked orders into his radio. "Contact Corvus Port Authority and local law enforcement immediately. I want every available unit converging on the abandoned Seagate cannery. Lock it down. Potential armed hostiles. 13 child hostages. I repeat, 13 child hostages. Send evidence teams here. And get animal control and wildlife specialists for these exotic species. We need to move now." He turned back to Alara. "The men who escaped in the truck before being caught might have alerted their boss, the Albatross. If that happens, they could try to move the children from the cannery. Or worse, we're in a race against time." The female paramedic checked Alara's vitals again. "She's stabilizing, but the naloxone is temporary. The original sedative is still in her system. She needs to go to the hospital for observation and further treatment to fully metabolize it." Alara wanted to protest, to insist on going to Corvus Port, but she knew the paramedic was right. She had done all she could. She had given them the information. Now it was up to Rourke and his teams. "You've done more than enough, Alara," Rourke said, as if reading her mind. His voice was surprisingly gentle. "You've given them a fighting chance. We'll handle it from here." As if on cue, the police radio crackled. "Delta team to base. Suspects from the fleeing truck are secure. Initial interrogation confirms Miss Provaja 7.0. Vance's intel. 13 children held at Seagate Cannery, Corvus Port. They also confirmed the identities of the 2 deceased children and the murder of the 2 adult chaperones. They're blaming it all on orders from the Albatross, real name Victor Quintana. He's a major player, been on international watch lists for years." A wave of relief, so profound it was physically weakening, washed over Alara. They had confirmation. Victor Quintana, the Albatross. The name of the monster who had orchestrated this nightmare. "That's good news," Rourke said, squeezing her shoulder reassuringly. "Now, we need to get you proper medical attention. Banner and Thorne are being transported separately. I'll stay here to coordinate with the Corvus Port operation." As the paramedics helped Alara towards the ambulance, she looked back at the grim warehouse, now a hive of activity under the harsh glare of floodlights. She had walked into the heart of darkness and somehow emerged with the key to unlock the children's prison. The race against time was on, but for the first time in 8 agonizing weeks, there was a tangible, desperate hope that 13 young lives might still be saved. The journey to Oakhaven General Hospital and the subsequent hours were a blur of medical checks, IV drips, and the slow, wearying process of the tranquilizer leaving Alara's system. The naloxone had worked its initial miracle, granting her clarity when it mattered most, but her body still had to fight off the residual effects of the potent drug. Detective Rourke had kept his promise, assigning a uniformed officer, a kind-faced woman named Officer Miller, to stay with her. Officer Miller provided intermittent updates, relayed from Rourke's team. The Seagate Cannery in Corvus Port had been located, a massive, derelict complex on the waterfront. It was surrounded. Tactical teams were preparing for entry. The situation was tense, the fate of the 13 children hanging precariously in the balance. Ilara lay in the sterile hospital bed, staring at the acoustic ceiling tiles, each tick of the clock amplifying her anxiety. She prayed, a desperate, silent plea to any higher power that might be listening. For the children, for their safety, for their rescue. Finally, as the first pale fingers of dawn were painting the sky outside her hospital window, Officer Miller entered, her face alight. "Miss Vance," she said, her voice brimming with emotion. "They have them. The children are safe. All 13 of them. They're out." Tears, hot and overwhelming, streamed down Ilara's face. Relief, so potent it left her breathless, washed over her in a dizzying wave. Are they okay?" "They're scared, malnourished, and clearly traumatized," Miller said, her own eyes glistening. "But initial reports say no serious physical injuries beyond that. They're being taken to a secure location in Corvus Port for medical checks and debriefing by child trauma specialists." Several arrests were made at the cannery, including men believed to be Quintana's top lieutenants. Quintana himself wasn't there, but the net is closing on him. The weight of weeks of fear and despair began to lift from Ilara's shoulders, replaced by an exhaustion so profound she felt she could sleep for a year. Later that morning, after doctors confirmed she was stable, she was discharged from the hospital and taken to the Oakhaven police station. The building was a hive of activity. FBI agents now swarmed the premises as the case had escalated to a federal level due to its interstate and international trafficking implications. Detective Rourke met her, his face drawn with fatigue but illuminated by a tired triumph. "Welcome back, Ilara. You look a damn sight better than when I last saw you." "The children," was all she could manage. "They're on their way here to Oakhaven," Rourke said. "Special transport. We want them reunited with their families as soon as possible. The parents are already gathered in the community rooms downstairs. It's emotional, as you can imagine." He paused. "We also recovered the bodies of Anya Sharma and Ben Carter from a shallow grave in the Anza Borrego Desert, based on a confession from one of Thorne's men." "I'm so sorry, Ilara." The news, though expected, hit her with fresh grief. Anya, her friend, Ben, so full of life, their lives brutally extinguished. And Victor Quintana, the albatross? Apprehended trying to board a private jet at a small airfield outside San Diego a few hours ago, Rourke said with grim satisfaction. "His empire is crumbling. Blackwood is cooperating fully, terrified of the charges he's facing. Thorne is defiant, but the evidence against him is overwhelming. They'll all face the full weight of the law." He led Ilara to a quiet office. "The families know you were instrumental in finding their children, Ilara. Some of them want to thank you. All of them are desperate." The wait for the children to arrive was agonizing. Ilara sat with the parents, a fragmented group united by an unbearable ordeal. There were tears, hushed whispers, raw expressions of hope and fear. Some parents approached Ilara, their gratitude overflowing. Others remained distant, their pain too acute, perhaps still grappling with the initial suspicion that had unfairly shadowed her. Ilara understood. There were no easy emotions in a situation like this. Then, the commotion. Vehicles arriving. The hushed, excited tones of officers. The doors to the community area opened, and a stream of small, hesitant figures began to enter, escorted by social workers and police officers. They were thinner, paler, their eyes wide and haunted, but they were them. A small boy with wide, frightened eyes. "Noah Williams," spotted Ilara. His face, etched with confusion, suddenly crumpled. "Miss Vance!" he cried, breaking away from his escort and running towards her, his arms outstretched. Ilara dropped to her knees, opening her arms, and Noah collided with her, burying his face in her shoulder, his small body racked with sobs. "You found us!" One by one, other children saw her, a chorus of her name, a rush of small bodies. Chloe, Samira, Zoe, Liam, still missing his blue mitten, and the others. They clung to her, a desperate, loving tangle of limbs and tears. Ilara held them tight, whispering reassurances, her own tears flowing freely, mingling with theirs. Parents surged forward, a chaotic, emotional wave of reunions. Laughter mixed with sobs, cries of relief, whispered words of love. Amidst the beautiful chaos, Ilara saw the faces of Leo Ramirez's and Maya Chen's parents. Their grief was a palpable presence in the room, a stark reminder of the two little lights that had been extinguished. Ilara's heart ached for them, an unbearable sorrow. Later, after the initial storm of emotion had subsided somewhat, Detective Rourke found Ilara sitting quietly in a corner, watching a little girl, Samira, shyly recount something to her tearful mother, occasionally glancing at Ilara for reassurance. "You did good, Ilara," Rourke said softly, sitting beside her. "More than good. You were incredibly brave. You saved them." Ilara shook her head. I couldn't give up on them." "That's what heroes do," Rourke said. He offered a rare, tired smile. "The road ahead will be long for these families, for these kids, for you too. But today we celebrate that 13 children are home." Ilara looked at the children, surrounded by their loving families. The nightmare was over, but its shadows would linger. The joy of the reunion was real, profound. Yet it was forever tinged with the sorrow of those lost. She thought of Anya and Ben, their bright spirits. She thought of Leo and Maya, their innocent lives cut short. She had walked through fire, faced down monsters, and emerged, not unscathed, but unbroken. The journey of healing, for her and for the children of Whispering Pines, was just beginning. But as she watched them, a fragile seed of hope took root in her heart. They had survived, and together, perhaps, they could find their way back to the light.